Hi! Welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a glossy envelope arrived offering a rancher peanuts for his ancestral Wyoming land, it seemed like a bad joke. But buried in that offer was a secret. An entire luxury community had been built on stolen soil, and they just picked a fight with the wrong cowboy. When the letter arrived, I thought it was some kind of marketing joke. It came in a glossy envelope, complete with an embossed seal and return address from Silver Mesa Heights Community Association. That name alone should have tipped me off. Nothing good ever comes from something calling itself an association. Still, I opened it, curious. Inside was a formal letter, signed in an aggressive cursive by a Karen Walsh, president, offering to purchase your agricultural holdings for the purpose of community development, conservation, and recreational expansion. Their generous offer, $150,000 for nearly 600 acres of prime Wyoming pasture land, complete with its own well, creek, and road access. I reread the number 3 times before laughing out loud. My old dog, Red, lying by the stove, perked up like he thought I'd gone crazy. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't a joke. It was an insult wrapped in legalese. Then came the kicker. The letter threatened that if I didn't engage in constructive dialogue within 10 business days, the HOA would pursue action through the County Board of Development for forced reassignment under community interest clauses. Translation: they were going to try to take my land by force, through the county, over my dead body. I've lived on this ranch since I could walk. My grandfather bought it after World War II when land was cheap and banks were generous to returning soldiers. 35,000 acres of high plains and pine, stretching from the old rail line down to the Shale Ridge, including a chunk of land right in the middle of what is now Silver Mesa Heights. That chunk had once held a mining camp, Lang No. 7 Shaft back when coal was king. It had been dormant since the 60s, but the deed was still clean, untouched, ours. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I drove into town the next morning and parked in front of the county records office. Cold wind bit through my jacket as I made my way inside, where the clerk, Holly, looked up and smiled. She's known me since I was in Little League. "Haven't seen you in a while, Justin. You okay?" "Yeah," I said, handing her the letter. "But I need to pull the land records on Silver Mesa Heights." Her eyebrows went up. "They trying to sue you?" "Worse. They think they can buy me out. I need to see who actually owns what out there." An hour later, I was at a back table, surrounded by survey maps, scanned deeds, and old lease agreements. The HOA development sat like a tick in the middle of my family's land, more specifically on Parcel 42 Alpha, leased in 1948 by the Lang family to what was then the Bighorn County Land Trust for a 99-year term. I flipped through the lease. The termination clause was clear, non-renewable without express written agreement from the Lang family. And guess what? Nobody ever renewed anything. As far as the law was concerned, I still owned it all. Their gentrified sidewalks, their bougie golf club, their imported decorative maples, all of it stood on my dirt, and they had no idea. I gathered the maps, made copies of the original lease, and drove straight to my attorney, Evelyn Marsh. She's the kind of woman who once made a judge cry without raising her voice. "They think they're buying 600 acres from you for a song," she said, reading the letter. "Do they even know who you are?" "They will soon," I said, sliding over the lease copy. "I want to make it official. Let's notify the county." Evelyn smiled like a timber wolf spotting a crippled elk. "Oh, we're going to do more than that. We're going to remind them who owns the ground they walk on." By the time I drove back out to the ranch that evening, the sun was dipping low behind the hills. My phone buzzed as I passed the front gate. Email from Evelyn. She'd already filed an official notice of inquiry with the county recorder's office, flagged the lease, and drafted a letter to the HOA's legal counsel. The game was on. The invitation came 3 days later, slid under the gate at the edge of my property in a cheap envelope with faux gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to an open dialogue regarding land negotiations," it read, "at the Silver Mesa Heights Community Hall, Thursday at 5 p.m. Attire, business casual." I considered tossing it in the fire, but something told me it was better to look this beast in the eyes. So, Thursday afternoon, I saddled up, not on a horse, but in my old Ford Super Duty, still dust-covered from a morning out near the southern boundary line, and drove the 30 minutes into enemy territory. Silver Mesa Heights was everything I hated about modern development. Identical beige homes with artificial stone facades, winding roads named after birds that had never flown here, and hedges trimmed with military precision. HOA paradise. The community hall sat near the golf course, flanked by ornamental fountains and flagpoles. I parked out front like I owned the place, because in a way, I did. My boots echoed off the polished concrete floors as I stepped inside. The air smelled like air freshener and expensive desperation. There were maybe 20 people in the room, all dressed in what I could only call boardroom cowboy. Pressed jeans, spotless boots, faux flannel. At the far end of the room stood a woman in a white blazer with a name tag that read, Karen Walsh, President. She was already talking when I walked in. Must keep in mind that certain individuals may attempt to distort facts for personal gain. Our goal is unity, not division. I cleared my throat. You must be talking about me. Heads turned. Karen's smile tightened as I approached. Mr. Lang, she said with mock warmth, thank you for accepting our invitation. Didn't say I accepted. Just came to hear what fantasy world this HOA's operating in. That ruffled her. She gestured toward a table. Shall we sit? There's much to discuss. We sat at opposite ends. Two men flanked her, one in a suit, probably their lawyer, the other an HOA board member with the expression of a man who's never been told no. Karen started. I understand you received our proposal. I hope you realize our offer was made in the spirit of progress and community development. I realize it was a joke, I replied, and that you're squatting on land you don't own. Karen gave a short laugh. Oh, come now. These threats may work in backwoods land disputes, but here in Silver Mesa, we operate under governance and procedure. I pulled out the copy of the lease. This backwoods document says otherwise. You're on Lang land, always have been. And unless I missed something, you haven't paid a dime in rent for over 20 years. That hit like a gunshot. Her lawyer leaned over to look at the document. The color drained from the board member's face. Karen, to her credit, didn't flinch. Not yet. We'll review this, she said curtly. But even if it were accurate, the doctrine of adverse possession may come into play. We've built infrastructure, invested. There's no adverse possession in Wyoming without hostile use and notice. And you didn't even know whose land you were on. That's not adverse. That's ignorant. Karen's mask cracked just enough for me to see the fury flicker behind her Botoxed smile. Mr. Lang, this doesn't need to be adversarial. Surely we can reach a private agreement. I stood. Oh, I agree. But I think you misunderstood who's negotiating here. I handed her a copy of the cease and desist Evelyn had prepared. Official notice of unauthorized development, demand to halt all HOA activities on Lang-owned parcels, and request for immediate removal of structures on parcels 42A, 42C, and 43D. Karen scanned it, her jaw tightening with every line. This will cripple the community, she whispered. No, Karen, I said, turning to walk away. This just exposes what's been rotting underneath it. As I left the hall, I could feel the weight of their stares on my back, silent, stunned, and afraid. The real shock hadn't even started yet. I didn't even make it back to the ranch before the panic started. My phone buzzed nonstop all the way down the gravel road. Calls from unknown numbers, voicemails from nervous board members, one particularly frantic message from someone claiming to be legal counsel for the HOA. I ignored them all. By the time I pulled up to the barn, I'd already heard from Evelyn. The county office had logged our filings, and the notices were live. The hammer had officially dropped. The next morning, the real chaos began. It started with the bank. According to Evelyn, the Silver Mesa HOA had been trying to secure a new round of refinancing, likely to fund their half-finished eco park and overpriced walking trail project. But now, with the title status flagged and a pending property dispute in the public record, the bank froze everything. No money, no guarantees, no progress. Then came the insurance. Their general liability carrier pulled out after a hasty internal audit. Title encumbrance, they cited. Elevated risk due to unresolved land ownership. The moment those words showed up in the system, their coverage vanished. Property, liability, board protection gone overnight. I didn't even have to lift a finger. The machine started eating itself. By Friday afternoon, residents of Silver Mesa were flooding the HOA email with questions. Why are road repairs on hold? Why is the new pool closure notice posted? Why did the bank suddenly halt construction on the golf course extension? And, more importantly, why were they just now hearing about a land dispute that could threaten their home values? Karen, never one to go down quietly, doubled down instead. She called an emergency HOA meeting Saturday morning in the clubhouse, but it wasn't a meeting, it was a rally. I got the footage later from someone who'd secretly recorded it. She stood there in front of a room full of angry homeowners, spinning a story that made me out to be a malicious land hoarder who had duped the system with ancient paperwork and predatory intent. She claimed the lease had expired, that my family had abandoned the land, and that her legal team was preparing to neutralize my claims in court. And then, the real bomb, she proposed a new emergency measure, a community fund levy, which would require each homeowner to pay a special $5,000 fee to defend Silver Mesa from unjust external legal threats. I nearly choked on my coffee when I read that. The kicker, she claimed the vote had passed unanimously, but not everyone was buying it. Sunday morning, I got a knock on my office door. It was a man in his 60s, broad-shouldered, weathered face, well-worn jacket. Name was Tom Rayburn. He lived on Trail Creek Lane in Silver Mesa and had been on the HOA's original architectural committee. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. "I think we've both been on the receiving end of some grade-A bull." We sat down at my kitchen table. Tom explained that he and several other longtime residents were beginning to suspect something was deeply wrong. The vote Karen claimed had passed. None of them were informed about it. Several had never seen a ballot. The people she said had supported the levy, some were out of town. Others had voted no. One had been dead for 3 months. "I checked with 4 of my neighbors," Tom said. "All of them say their signatures were forged." I handed him a copy of the lease and the official land use filings. "She's been building on stolen land, Tom. Now she wants your money to cover the fallout." He rubbed his face and sighed. "Then it's worse than I thought." Tom didn't leave empty-handed. I gave him copies of everything, including the cease and desist, and encouraged him to speak to an attorney. If people inside Silver Mesa started turning against her, the whole facade could collapse before it even reached court. Before he left, he said something I won't forget. "She thought we were sheep. But it turns out, you're the shepherd." By Monday morning, 3 more residents had contacted me, quietly, nervously, asking for details. It was spreading. The HOA board was fracturing. The panic was becoming visible. And Karen. She was just getting started. I should have known Karen wouldn't just sit back and let things unravel. The woman had the tenacity of a raccoon in a dumpster fire, determined, shameless, and way too comfortable with filth. The day after my talk with Tom, Evelyn forwarded me a copy of a petition that had been submitted to the county clerk's office, a formal claim from the Silver Mesa HOA, contesting my rights to the land. Their argument? That the lease was functionally abandoned, that the HOA had made significant and irreversible capital investments, and that therefore, by doctrine of implied easement and estoppel, the land was now effectively theirs. It was nonsense. Legal spaghetti thrown against a courthouse wall. But then I saw the signatures, dozens of them, residents, supposedly backing Karen's version of the truth. Some names I recognized, people Tom had told me were against the levy. Others I knew had explicitly stated support for my case in private. The best part? Right there, tucked between a Judy M. Rollins and a Stephen B. Hahn, was a man named Larry Fieldstone. Larry had died of a stroke 7 months ago. I drove straight to Evelyn's office. She was already flipping through the documents when I walked in. "Forgery," she said flatly, handing me the stack. "I've already contacted 3 people whose signatures appear here. All of them deny signing anything. Can we nail her on it?" Evelyn gave me a smile that could have frozen lava. "Oh, we're not just nailing her. We're building the gallows." She filed a formal complaint for fraudulent petitioning and signature forgery attached to the broader civil case. But that wasn't all. She also subpoenaed the HOA's internal communications, minutes, and records on the basis of deceptive collection of community funds. That's when we got our next break. One of the newer residents, a tech consultant named Andrea, forwarded Evelyn a private email thread between Karen and the HOA board. In it, Karen referred to me as the cowboy problem and detailed plans to outmaneuver the legal nuisance with sufficient PR and pressure. But the real kicker was a line buried in one of the replies from the HOA's treasurer. "Isn't the lease technically still valid? Should we be doing this without disclosure?" We had them. At the same time, Tom returned with even bigger news. He'd spoken to a former employee of the original land development firm that built Silver Mesa, an older gentleman named Walter Grant. now retired and living 2 towns over. Walter had handled document scanning and filing for the real estate firm in the late 90s and remembered the Lang parcel lease vividly. Everyone knew that land wasn't clean, he said. There was this whole mess with the mineral rights and the lease clock ticking, but the higher-ups said to push forward and keep quiet. Tom arranged for me to meet Walter at a diner just off the interstate. Walter was gray, stiff in the joints, and sharp as a scalpel. He came armed with a file folder of his own, memos, emails, dated internal faxes, enough paper to give a court clerk a stroke. I asked him point blank, did they knowingly build on land they didn't own? He didn't hesitate. Yes, they hoped the Lang family wouldn't notice before the 99 years were up, and by then they'd hide behind the homeowners. I thanked him and offered to pay for lunch. He refused. I've lived long enough to know when a man's been done dirty. You're not just defending land. You're defending truth. By the time I got home, Evelyn was already preparing witness statements and affidavits. We weren't just sitting on a property dispute anymore. We were sitting on a powder keg of willful fraud, coordinated deception, and now federal wire fraud, since the levy communications had traveled across state lines. And Karen, she must have smelled the smoke, because the next day, I got served. A lawsuit filed by the Silver Mesa HOA, alleging defamation, malicious interference, and deliberate destabilization of a lawful residential organization. They wanted an emergency injunction to silence me, freeze my public statements, and stop me from harassing residents. I didn't say a word. I just handed the papers to Evelyn, who laughed so hard she spilled her coffee. You're not harassing them, she said, shaking her head. You're burying them. And now they're trying to throw dirt in their own grave. The hearing was set for the following Thursday in the Sweetwater County Courthouse. Gray stone, cold halls, and a judge with the personality of a granite countertop. Perfect setting for what was shaping up to be a public execution. The emergency injunction Karen filed didn't stand a chance, but that didn't stop her from parading into the courtroom with a full entourage. Private attorney in a $1,000 suit, 2 HOA board members looking like they'd just lost a bet, and, of course, Karen herself, dressed like she was auditioning for a real estate commercial. Evelyn and I sat quietly at our table while the judge reviewed the packet. The courtroom was small but packed. A few curious residents from Silver Mesa showed up, no doubt wondering what kind of hell their HOA had dragged them into. Karen's lawyer began with a speech so oily it could have fried a bucket of chicken. He claimed I had launched a calculated smear campaign to damage the HOA's standing, that I was weaponizing outdated property documents to interfere with a peaceful community, and that the Lang family's lease was functionally extinguished due to non-use and lack of enforcement. Evelyn didn't even flinch. When it was her turn, she walked up with the calm confidence of someone holding a winning lottery ticket. She introduced the court to the lease, highlighted the non-renewal clause, and detailed how the HOA had continued to build, maintain, and profit on land it didn't legally control, all while actively avoiding investigation into title status. Then she brought up the forged petition signatures, showing the judge how at least 6 names, including a deceased man, had been falsely listed. She even brought in a forensic handwriting expert's early opinion to support it. And just as Karen's lawyer stood to object, Evelyn dropped the email thread, Karen's own internal HOA correspondence. The judge raised an eyebrow. Ms. Marsh, are you alleging intentional fraud by the Homeowners Association? Evelyn smiled like she'd been waiting to say it all week. Yes, Your Honor. And we're preparing a full civil suit to that effect, along with affidavits from residents, former contractors, and internal whistleblowers. But for today, we simply request the injunction be denied and our counterclaim for fraudulent community levy and land encroachment be allowed to proceed. Karen's lawyer sputtered something about unsubstantiated hearsay, but the judge cut him off. Motion to silence denied. Counterclaim accepted. Prepare for full hearing. Karen looked like someone had punched her in the solar plexus. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The crowd murmured. Evelyn leaned over and whispered, "Now it's official. We're in the driver's seat." After court adjourned, a reporter from a local news station caught me in the hallway. Apparently, word was spreading fast. Local rancher claims HOA built a neighborhood on stolen land was already being drafted for the evening segment. I didn't say much, just confirmed we were pursuing action and told them to talk to my attorney. But that evening, my phone blew up. Calls, emails, messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some from other HOAs, from neighboring counties, even from a few attorneys out of state who wanted to talk strategy. More importantly, Silver Mesa was now imploding from the inside. Tom texted me a photo of a notice someone had taped to the clubhouse door. Emergency meeting. Residents demand financial audit. The HOA board was being called out publicly. Residents were asking for transparency. And one woman apparently tried to access the association's budget reports and was told that information is restricted. Word is she called her lawyer immediately. The next day, Evelyn got an email from a county official. They were initiating a title investigation into the original development permits for Silver Mesa, prompted by the documents we submitted. If they found irregularities, especially with tax filings, land grants, or infrastructure approvals, the fallout could go nuclear. I spent that night reviewing witness statements, especially Walter Grant's. His affidavit read like a confession from a mob bookkeeper. Dates, names, memos, the works. He even provided a scanned fax from 1999 showing that the developer had internally flagged the Lang lease as active, but chose not to disclose it during construction financing. And just when I thought things couldn't get better, Evelyn called late that night with one final update. The judge had scheduled the civil trial date, a full hearing, discovery, testimony, everything. And with the counterclaim for unlawful use, fraudulent levy, forged petitioning, and civil trespass, we were looking at a multi-million-dollar judgment. Karen had started a fire with a matchbook of lies. Now she was about to find out what a controlled burn looks like. By the time the county's title investigation kicked into gear, Silver Mesa looked less like a community and more like a slow-motion train wreck. Mailboxes were overflowing with anonymous flyers, some slamming Karen for mismanaging funds, others warning residents that their property deeds might not be worth the paper they were printed on. A few brave souls even started taping handwritten signs to their windows. No more HOA lies, and Lang owns the land. We demand answers. Meanwhile, Evelyn was building our case with surgical precision. Discovery requests went out to the HOA demanding a full accounting of every dollar spent from the community fund, every board meeting transcript, and all communications related to land use. They stalled, of course, claimed documents were missing, or that the HOA's cloud server had been compromised, which made it all the more satisfying when Evelyn got her hands on a backup from an IT vendor the HOA had quietly let go last year. He'd held on to a full archive. Emails, spreadsheets, scanned checks. It was a digital paper trail soaked in gasoline. What we found was worse than expected. Karen had been dipping into HOA funds for years. Lavish retreats, executive dinners at luxury resorts, personal vehicle reimbursements for trips that never happened, and even a recurring monthly expense labeled Community Relations Consulting, which turned out to be a shell company registered in her sister-in-law's name. In total, nearly $160,000 unaccounted for. But it didn't stop there. We discovered that the emergency legal defense levy she pushed through with forged votes had been spent before it was even collected. She'd borrowed from the operating reserve, redirecting funds to cover previous deficits, ones she'd created with her personal mismanagement. The HOA was flat broke, legally, morally, structurally. And yet, she still showed up to board meetings, sunglasses on indoors, spinning her narrative like nothing had changed. "This is a coordinated smear campaign," she said in one clip. "A rural landowner trying to extort our peaceful neighborhood." Then came the final straw. One Friday afternoon, as I was checking fence lines near the North Ridge, I got a call from Tom. He sounded shaken. "You need to come down to the community center, now." When I got there, 2 sheriff's cruisers were parked outside. Inside, residents were gathered in hushed clusters. At the front of the room, Karen sat stiffly in a folding chair, hands on her lap. 2 plainclothes investigators stood nearby. A deputy handed her a folder and read aloud the charges: criminal fraud, document falsification, unlawful collection of public funds, and misuse of fiduciary power. Someone gasped. Someone else applauded. Karen didn't speak, just stared forward as if waiting for someone to wake her up. They escorted her out of the front door in handcuffs. No one stopped them. The board collapsed overnight. 3 members resigned. The treasurer disappeared entirely. A temporary oversight committee formed, composed of residents who now just wanted answers and some damn peace. That night, I met Evelyn at her office. She had the final estimates tallied. Between back rent, property damages, civil fraud, and punitive penalties, she said, flipping through the paperwork. We're looking at a conservative claim of $3.2 million, possibly more if the judge tacks on personal damages. And the land? I asked. She smiled. Still yours, and the county just voided all HOA claims to it. Their charters suspended. HOA operations are frozen. You're officially their landlord now. Congratulations, you own a luxury golf community. I didn't laugh. Not yet. Instead, I stared at the county seal on the first page of the judge's order. All rights to the land known as Silver Mesa Heights remain with the Lang family estate. I traced the words with my thumb, letting the weight of it settle. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. The courthouse was packed the morning our trial began, not just with lawyers and reporters, but with dozens of residents from Silver Mesa, some there to support me, others just desperate to know what the hell was going to happen to their homes. I walked in through the side entrance with Evelyn at my side and a steel thermos of black coffee in my hand. I hadn't slept well. Too many years of silence had led to this one moment where everything came boiling to the surface. Karen, on the other hand, was already seated at the defendant's table, pale and rigid, her wrists still bearing the faint pink mark where the cuffs had been days earlier. She had a new lawyer, a federal criminal defense type who looked like he charged by the syllable. Not that it mattered. No spin doctor could undo what was about to unfold. The state opened strong. The prosecutor laid it out in brutal detail, how the HOA, under Karen's leadership, had operated on land they never legally acquired. How they collected funds under false pretenses, forged documents, pressured residents into silence, and then tried to bury the truth when the lease surfaced. He introduced exhibits, the petition with fake signatures, internal emails, and receipts showing HOA money used for everything from spa treatments to a custom-built gazebo on Karen's private deck. Then came the witnesses. Tom testified first, calm and direct. He spoke about the rigged vote, the unexplained levies, and the fear tactics used to keep residents in line. Then Andrea, the tech consultant, took the stand and read from Karen's emails aloud. The line, "We can spin this cowboy nonsense into a PR win," hung in the courtroom like smoke. And then Walter Grant stepped forward. The man moved slow, but when he talked, you could hear a pin drop. He explained the buried lease records, the deliberate ignorance of the developers, and the pressure he faced to stay quiet. He even brought a printed memo from 1999 with the words "Lease in dispute, do not disclose to bank," stamped in red across the top. When it was my turn, I spoke plainly. I told the jury about my family's land, my grandfather's lease, the years I'd watched as people built over something they never asked for. I talked about the threats, the lies, and how close I came to just walking away from it all. But mostly, I talked about the people who'd trusted that HOA, who'd bought homes thinking their foundations were solid. None of this needed to happen, I said. If they'd just told the truth from the beginning, we wouldn't be here. Karen never looked at me. Her defense attorney tried to argue that she was just following precedent, relying on advisors, unaware of the deeper legal issues. But the jury wasn't buying it. The documents didn't lie. The forged signatures didn't lie, and Karen's own emails, cold, calculated, damned her more than anything else. After 6 days of testimony and less than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, criminal mismanagement, and malicious misuse of fiduciary powers. The civil verdict followed immediately after. The court awarded me $3.2 million in damages, plus full rights to enforce lease termination. The judge ruled that all HOA assets, including shared facilities and infrastructure, were now to be assessed under the Lang estate until a negotiated buyout or lease agreement could be reached. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence said it all. Karen was remanded into custody immediately. 17 years, with no possibility of parole for at least 10. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood up stiffly, turned once, perhaps toward the door, perhaps toward the life she'd torched, and disappeared behind the wooden divider. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. I gave a single statement. Justice was served. The land is ours. And next time someone offers you a lowball deal with a threat attached, check who really owns the dirt under your feet. A month after the verdict, I stood on the ridge above Silver Mesa Heights and watched the sunrise creep across what used to be their clubhouse, now quiet, empty, and locked behind a rusted gate. The HOA signs had been stripped from the fences. The fountains had been shut off. The golf course was overgrown at the edges, and the pool sat covered in a film of green, like a metaphor nobody wanted to say out loud. The land was mine again. Officially, completely. The county had dissolved the HOA charter within 2 weeks of the trial. The board resigned en masse, some quietly fleeing town, others just disappearing into their beige homes like ghosts. Karen was in a federal detention center downstate, and last I heard, she'd already tried and failed to file an appeal. 17 years. I'd call it justice, but it still felt too light. I didn't evict the residents. That wasn't the plan. Evelyn and I drafted lease agreements, real ones, clean ones, and offered them to the homeowners. Pay fair market value for the land your house sits on or move. No tricks, no threats, just clarity. Roughly half chose to leave, their homes sold off at a loss or repossessed by banks trying to salvage something from the wreckage. The other half signed with relief. Some even thanked me. I didn't know what was happening, one woman told me as she handed over her signed lease. We trusted them. I nodded and said nothing. There wasn't much to say. With the reclaimed land, I started building. Not more houses, not the plastic kind, but something that would last. On the northern bluff, I laid the foundation for a new community fire station staffed by volunteers from nearby towns. On the south end, we broke ground on a proper equestrian center, stables, a full arena, even training programs for kids. And on the old HOA common ground, where Karen once promised a private eco-park, I opened a public garden. No gate codes, no fees, just soil and sun. The entrance arch bore a new sign. Lang Ranch Commons, no HOA, just land, neighbors, and room to breathe. The first time I saw it lit up at night, I just stood there in silence, hands in my pockets. It was everything the HOA promised but never delivered. Evelyn said we could have auctioned the remaining parcels and walked away with more than $7 million. Maybe I still will someday, but not yet. For now, the land needed to breathe. So did the people on it. On the 4th of July, we held a barbecue in the field that used to be the HOA's private event lawn. I rolled up in my pickup, parked next to a line of lawn chairs, and flipped burgers for 2 hours. Tom brought his grandkids. Andrea played DJ. Even Walter Grant showed up, wearing a cowboy hat that looked older than me. He handed me a beer and said, "You ever consider running for county commissioner?" I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the spatula. That night, as fireworks cracked above the Wyoming sky, I stood out by the fence line and looked back at everything we'd fought through. Lies, threats, lawsuits, fraud, politics. And it hit me. This wasn't just about boundaries or deeds or who had the bigger lawyer. It was about ownership. Real ownership. The kind you don't sign for, but earn day by day, by refusing to be pushed, by standing your ground, and by never letting a bully talk you out of what's yours. So yeah, next time some HOA tries to send a cowboy an ultimatum, they'd better check who owns the goddamn mountain first.